Please welcome Professor Chantal Mouffe.
Many thanks for the introduction and for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and to close this festival TOpublic. So, yeah, what's future for democracy in a post-political age? When we envisage the present stage of democracy in our societies, one of the assertions that we often come across is that our current condition is one of post-democracy. The meaning conveyed by this notion of post-democracy is that modern democracies, while maintaining the facade of formal democratic principle, are increasingly controlled by privileged elites. The implementation of neoliberal policies has led to the colonization of the state by corporate interests, and crucial political decisions are now taken outside the traditional democratic channels. This is at the origin of the loss of legitimacy of democratic institutions, which manifests itself in a growing phenomenon of depoliticization. So that's the core of this thesis of post-democracy, which has been, by the way, put forward principally by a British sociologist, Colin Crouch. Well, I agree with many aspects of this analysis, but I think that when we scrutinize the phenomenon of depoliticization, which is considered as one of important element of post-democracy, it is also necessary to address its political context, because basically Colin Crouch centers on the economic reason for this. And I think that it's also very important, particularly, to acknowledge the role that parties of the left have played in this process of disaffection with democratic politics and this process of depoliticization. In the book On the Political, I have examined the reason for what I call the post-political perspective, which has become dominant in liberal democratic societies. I have argued that it is linked to the move toward the center, which in the last decade has been the strategy of social democratic parties all over Europe. A strategy which, under the name of the Third Way, was, of course, as you all know, first elaborated by New Labour in Britain and theorized by Anthony Giddens. According to such an approach, Western societies have entered a second stage of modernity, what that they call, and that of course is a thesis defended by Giddens, but also in Germany by Ulrich Beck, that we are now in a stage of reflexive modernization, where the adversarial model of politics, which was characteristic of the first stage of modernization, which they call the simple modernization, now this adversarial model has become obsolete. Giddens claims that it is not necessary to think beyond left and right. In fact, there is one of his books is called Beyond Left and Right. And that we need to envisage a new type of politics of the radical center, which transcends the old-fashioned left-right divide. Such a view was later adopted by other socialist and social democratic parties, first in Germany, and of course by Schröder. He spoke of a dritte Mitte. But after it migrated in many other European countries. And of course, those social democratic parties who are following this third way line, I know they don't want to present themselves as left. They say that they are center left. Under the pretense of modernizing the social democratic project so as to adapt it to a globalized world, center-left parties have in fact capitulated to neoliberalism. Convinced that there was no alternative to the current form of globalized financial capitalism, they have accepted the framework established by neoliberal hegemony. I mean, that was absolutely, of course, clear in Britain with Tony Blair, who, when he came to power, did not at all try to transform, the terrain which had been created by Margaret Thatcher, but simply, I mean, I remember I wrote an article at that time called Blairism, Thatcherism with a Human Face. So it was simply adaptation, a little bit more of redistribution, some kind of humanization of this project, but not putting into question. And of course, this is something which is very spread in Western Europe. So those parties, center left, have abandoned, in fact, any attempt to challenge the existing relation of power. They now limit themselves to propose ways to humanize, as I was saying, neoliberal globalization. And this is why their policies are very hard to distinguish from those of the center-right parties. And this consensus at the center, as I call it on the political, and is, in my view, very negative consequences for democratic politics. And it is the absence of a real choice between clearly distinguishable alternatives which explain the current lack of interest for politics, which have produced a drastic fall in participation in election. And of course, the phenomenon of abstention has been widespread all over Europe. So it seems to me that in the discussion about post-democracy, the role played by this post-political situation is not sufficiently taken into account. It is, of course, necessary to grasp the transformation of the capitalist system which have provided the economic condition for the success of neoliberal globalization, but that does not automatically explain the reason for the disappearance of a vibrant democratic debate about the different ways in which social relations and public institutions can be organized. And this is, I think, where the responsibility of the parties of the left can be and need to be recognized. By failing to acknowledge that politics is intrinsically partisan, and that democratic politics require what I've called an agonistic debate among conflicting projects. By agonistic debate, I mean that there need to be a choice between clearly different projects, not a little bit more of the same. That basically in question is struggle between different hegemonies. So, and of course, this is what has disappeared with the third way. So, and this is why, democratic politics, without this agonistic debate and a choice between real and alternative, that cannot be really a vibrant democracy. And this is why this consensual politics of the third way has contributed to the disaffection with politics, which is at the core of our post-democratic condition. When citizens feel that they cannot have a say in the fundamental decision which concern their common affair, and that political questions are dealt with now by experts, because they are considered of a technical nature. I mean, of course, the progression is clear. There is no alternative to neoliberal globalization, okay? So there is no possibility of making political choice. So it means that, in fact, the best people to deal with that are experts, because political questions have now become technical issue. And I think this is what is really crucial at the core of post-politics and post-democracy. And of course, in this case, it means that democratic institutions have been emptied of their substance and their legitimacy is therefore threatened. Elections are reduced to providing a rubber stamp for measures imposed by a variety of actors whose interests are not publicly accountable, and the democratic process, in fact, loses its raison d'être. To be sure, our societies still claim to be democratic, but what's the meaning of democracy in our post-political times? Scrutinizing the nature of liberal democracy in a book which is in fact previous to On the Political, which is called The Democratic Paradox, I had brought to the fore the tension existing between its two ethico-political principles. I mean, ethico-political principle is a term which I borrow from Montesquieu, and those ethico-political principle, Montesquieu appelle that the passion that move a regime. This is what are the ethico-political principles. And in the case of liberal democracy, they are, of course, liberty and equality. Liberal democracy should be understood, that's one thing that I claim the democratic paradox following, in fact, the work of C.B. Macpherson, should be understood as the articulation between two different traditions. On one side, the liberal tradition of the rule of law and individual rights, and on the other side, the democratic tradition of popular sovereignty. For instance, C.B. Macpherson, which I've just referred to, is shown in a very nice little book called The Life and Times of Liberal Democracy, or this articulation between liberalism and democracy, which was established during the 19th century as a consequence that liberalism was democratized and democracy was liberalized. However, there was always a tension between the exigencies of liberty and those of equality, because you can never have a perfect reconciliation of liberty and equality. So there is always one that need to have what in philosophy we call a lexical prevalence. So, of course, this tension, in fact, is a tension which, as I argue, on the democratic paradox, is something which should not see as a problem, because it is precisely what creates the possibility for pluralism. And it's a tension which is provided the dynamics of the confrontation between left and right up till now. You know, sometimes the liberal principle was dominant, some other time it was the democratic one of popular sovereignty, but there was always possibility of renegotiation. This history of democratic politics can be visualized in terms of the struggle for the predominance of one of the principle over the other. What was important was that, as I just said, the decontestation always remained open. Well, what has happened under the current hegemony of neoliberalism is that the liberal component has become so dominant that the democratic one is almost disappeared. Democracy is now understood simply in terms of rule of law and defense of human rights, and the idea of popular sovereignty has been relinquished as being obsolete. It has been declared a zombie category. In my view, this displacement of the democratic tradition by the liberal one is one of the main features of our post-democratic condition. And it is clearly visible in the abandon by center-left parties of the struggle for equality. Their main slogans are now about choice, fairness, equity, inclusion, but they take pains to avoid speaking of equality that they consider as being too tainted by the equalitarianism of the socialist ideal that they have repudiated. Deprived of the vocabulary that constituted the backbone of its vision of power, it is therefore not surprising that the left is incapable of envisaging an alternative to neoliberal globalization. As a consequence of this consensus at the center, we are currently witnessing a crisis of representation. I think we clearly are today witnessing crisis of representative democracy, and I will come back to that in a moment, because there are different ways to understand this crisis. Because, in fact, this consensus at the center deprives democratic citizens of what I've just referred to as an agonistic debate, where they can make their voice heard and choose between real alternatives. Without abandoning the consensual politics of the third way, there is in fact no hope to escaping the post-democratic trend, which is at the origin of the progressive irrelevance of democratic institutions. It is necessary, therefore, and that's one of my theses on the political, to fight against the blurring of the line between left and right. Of course, this blurring has happened, it's an empirical fact, but such blurring, patchy third-way theories, far from constituting a progress, because they say, no, but it's a progress, it's a move towards a more mature democracy. And I argue in that book 10 years ago already that it could lead to the demise of democracy. It is urgent to revive the democratic process And this can only be done by launching a counter-hegemonic offensive against the neoliberal attempt to destroy the central institution of the welfare state and to privatize the whole of social life, subjecting it to the rule of the market. I submit that it is in this context of post-politic and post-democracy that we should understand the growth of right-wing populist parties, whose success is due to the fact that they appear as being the only ones that offer an alternative to the existing order. And this is why I was arguing that this consensus of the center is very problematic for democracy because it's not something more mature. The contrary, it creates the terrain for the development of right-wing populist parties. And that was already 10 years ago. And I think that today we are seeing, in fact, there are many more of those right-wing populist parties all over Europe. So I think that, in that sense, my prediction was correct. And I think we should see those right-wing populist parties as a form of rejection of the post-political system, because it does not allow the citizen to have a voice in the decision which concern them. In fact, I think we could say that they represent a cry by the people to have a voice. And I will come back a little bit later to that, but I think that's definitively one of the message of the Brexit, a cry of the people who feel that they are excluded. Of course, this rejection of the post-political system can be articulated in very different ways, and all of them are, and not all of them are conducive to a deepening of democracy. Clearly, this is obviously a problem with the Brexit. I'm not the one to celebrate the Brexit. Everything depends on how the adversary is defined, and this is where the difference between right-wing populism and left-wing populism that I will discuss later is crucial. In my view, an urgent task for those who want to recover and deepen the democratic dynamic is to restore the dimension of popular sovereignty, which has been discarded by neoliberal hegemony, in order to find ways to give a voice to the people. The aim should be to re-equilibrate the balance between the two components of the liberal democratic regime, so as to create the condition for an agonistic democracy. So we need to reestablish, the dimension of the democratic tradition of equality and popular sovereignty, which has been, let's say, discarded by the hegemony of liberalism. And in fact, a very specific interpretation of liberalism, which is the neoliberalism, because there are main difference between traditional liberalism. Here, by the way, I want to insist, when I speak of liberalism, I do not refer to economic liberalism. No, I only refer to the political liberalism. Liberalism as a set of political institutions. Till recently, this consensus at the center it's been put into question, rejected principally on the side of right-wing populist parties. And it is clear that it has been articulated in a xenophobic language. The immigrants being presented, as the them, the adversary, because here it's clear that right-wing populist parties, they do know that politics is partisan. They do know that politics consists in establishing a frontier. And that is no point to say that there is no more frontier and that, we can all be at the center. But of course, as I was saying before, the problem is how they constructed frontier and put, the adversary, the immigrants, saying the one which put into question the possibility, of the good welfare for the national. Fortunately, recently, in fact, since 2011, or what we could say, we've begun to witness a different kind of challenge to this post-political situation, thanks to the development of a variety of protest movements. With those protests, here I'm referring to Occupy and the Indignados, for instance. With those protests, we have seen the emergence of other ways, certainly much more estimable, of reacting against the democratic deficit that characterize our post-democratic societies. If so many people have been taking to the street in those protest movements, it's because they've lost faith in the traditional parties and they feel that their voice cannot be heard through traditional political channels. For instance, there's a very interesting motto of the Indignados, and in which they say, we've got a vote, but we don't have a voice. Tenemos a voto, pero no tenemos voz. And of course, it's clear that if you've got a vote, but when you go to the election, you've got to choose between center-right and center-left, which offer the same thing, basically, you don't have a voice. So this, for me, is what is at the core of those protest movements when they come from the progressive side. Here, of course, it's important to acknowledge that there are many different interpretations of those protest movements. And I'm going to present mine, but it's not the only one. Many theories, for instance, influenced by the Exodus approach, which have been developed by Michael Hart and Antonio Negri, see in recent mobilization a manifestation of the power of what they call the multitude. Multitude constructing new form of social relation outside traditional institutions. They celebrate those protest movements as the realization of the common, that's also a big buzzword of this tendency, and present their encampment and the occupation of the square as a prefiguration of what they call absolute democracy. For them, those movements are characteristic of the new form of struggle of the precarious worker, which of course are typical of post-Fordism, and they argue that what Spanish indignados, with their call for democracia realia, real democracy, no advocate, is not so much they say direct democracy, because direct democracy is, in their view, still too representative. So it's not a direct democracy in which all the citizens will be able to participate. They say what those movement really advocate is a completely, radically different understanding of democracy. A democracy beyond representation. A democracy that is called in actu, or sometimes it's called a presentist democracy. Presentist democracy, in their view, is the opposite of representative democracy. It is a matter of collective political practices without any claim to government. They only insist on form of assemblyism. They are against any form of representation altogether, and they express a total rejection of liberal democracy. So this is the interpretation of those movements by the school, or the school may be a bit too strong, but the people who are influenced by the line of Exodus of Hart and Negri. Well, my interpretation follows a different line. In my view, understood as refusal of the post-political order, those protests can be read as a call for a radicalization of liberal democratic institutions, not for their rejection. What they exact are better, more inclusive form of representation. To satisfy their demand for voice, existing representative institutions have to be transformed and new ones have to be established so as to create the condition for an agonistic confrontation where citizens will be offered real, alternative. Such a confrontation requires not a strategy of exodus, a strategy of desertion from existing institutions, which of course is the line defended by Hart and Negri, but a strategy of what I call a strategy of engagement with those institutions in order to profoundly transform them. So here we've got, in fact, two different views of what radical politics should be. A strategy of what I call of withdrawal from the institution to create, a new different world outside, or a strategy of engagement with institutions in order to enter the institution and to profoundly transform them. And of course, there are a lot of debate among activists about those different strategies. To effectively challenge neoliberal hegemony, I think that it is crucial that all the energies that have erupted in those protest movements are not diverted towards wrong allies. And I'm afraid that this is what could happen if representative institutions are seen as the main target of the protest. Of course, there is no denying that representative institutions are in crisis, but I will say that they are in crisis in their current form. And I do not believe that the solution resides in the establishment of a non-representative democracy, or that extra-parliamentary struggles are the only vehicle for making democratic advances. Of course, that's also one of the theses that goes together, with the first approach that I've presented. Of course, such views are popular because they chime with the idea, which is fashionable among sectors of the left, that the multitude could auto-organize itself, avoiding taking power and becoming state. I must say that to find such an anti-political approach among activists involved in the various movements of the outrage is worrying, because it forecloses the possibility of designing an adequate strategy for their struggle. When representation is seen as the problem, the aim cannot be to engage with current institutions to make them more representative and more accountable, but to discard them completely. The objective of the movement will be then visualized in terms of exodus from the given form of democracy, on the ground that attempting to transform existing institutions is vain and that representative democracy is to be relinquished. Many among those who reject representation, in fact, identify representative democracy with its current post-democratic form and with the actual working of the parliamentary system. They do not see that the problem concerns the way representative institutions function at the moment. So what needs to be challenged is, in fact, the lack of alternative offered to the citizen, not the very idea of representation. In fact, I will argue, and I'm really convinced of that, that a pluralist democratic society cannot exist without representation. To begin with, as the essentialist approach is made clear, and this essentialist approach, by the way, has been presented in the book that I wrote jointly with Ernesto Laclau, to which it has been referred to in the introduction. It's called Hegemony in Socialist Strategy Towards a Radical Democratic Politics, so where we, in fact, make a critique of the Marxist essentialism and insist for the need for an anti-essentialist approach. So, according to this anti-essentialist approach, identities are never already given. They are always produced through processes of identification. And this process of identification is a process of representation. It is through representation that collective political subjects are created, and they do not exist beforehand. So, representation is not something that people are there with it and then you represent them. The representation is a process of constitution of subjects. Every assertion of a political identity is thereby interior, not exterior to the process of representation. Representation is not a one-way process going from the represented to the representative, because it is the very identity of the represented which is at stake in the process of representation. And I think that this is the central flaw of those who argue that representative democracy is an oxymoron. And that's, of course, is a thesis of the people who defend the exodus approach. And they say that real democracy should be direct or even, as we've seen, presentist. As if democracy could exist without representation, because that would mean democracy existing without the constitution of democratic identities. And I think that is clearly something which is unthinkable. This is why, representation, democracy without representation is unthinkable. Moreover, and that I think is another important argument for representation, in a democratic society where pluralism is not envisaged in the harmonious anti-political form and where ever-present possibility of antagonism is taken into account, of course that's also a thesis that we develop in Hegemony Socialist Strategy, then in that case, representative institution, by giving form to the division of society, play a crucial role in allowing for the institutionalization of this conflictual dimension. However, such a role can only be fulfilled through the availability of an agonistic confrontation. So this institutionalization of the conflictual dimension. If we don't have agonistic confrontation, you don't have institutionalization of the conflict. What constitutes the central problem with our current post-political model is the absence of such an agonistic confrontation. And of course, this cannot be remedied through horizontalist practices. Well, here I want to insist on something because I don't want to be misunderstood. This critique of horizontalist practices does not mean that I consider that all the type of activism to which such a term refers have no role to play in an agonistic democracy. In fact, I'm convinced that the variety of the social movement and the multiple forms of activism are, including, for instance, what is called activism, utilization of aesthetic strategies for political activism. I think that all those are valuable, not only to raise consciousness and to bring to the fore issues that are neglected, but also providing a realm for the cultivation of different social relations. In fact, what I contend is that those practices, beside the fact that they always entail a dimension of representation, and to argue that those are non-representative practices is absolutely, don't go. So those practices, and that's my central point, cannot provide a substitute for representative institution, and that it is necessary to establish a synergy between those horizontalist practices and other more institutional forms of struggle. If the protest movement refused to establish alliances with traditional channels deemed to be intrinsically impervious to democratic transformation, their radical potential will be lost. And of course, this is what has happened with different Occupy movement, with the Indignados. In fact, in the Indignados, there's a special case because obviously there's been the creation of Podemos, which decided that it will not leave to all this those struggles to disappear because in fact what happened in Spain after those incredible demonstration and form of occupation, they were general election, and the Partido Popular, the right, who won with an absolute majority. And of course it was understandable because the Indians were saying we should do not go to vote. Vote. So obviously the right was. So the Podemos decided that it was important to intervene in order to mobilize and direct those protests in an institutional direction. So this is, of course, important. But when they are left to their own, we know that they disappear. Of course, one could argue, and I will be agree that it's not something that is done completely in vain, because, for instance, I think that certainly the success and the mobilization of Bernie Sanders in the US has been in part influenced by Occupy, and in Britain the success of Jeremy Corbyn as the nomination of the leader of the Labour Party is certainly also the Occupy London Stock Exchange is play a role. But there you can see that it is only at the moment when there is an institutional translation that those movements can really have a lot of more serious impact. And I think that, therefore, it is time, I will argue, and some people might not like that, but I think it's time to stop romanticizing spontaneism and horizontalism. The call for democracy that is now being voiced in a variety of quarters can only produce lasting effect if the activists involved in those movements, instead of implementing a strategy of exodus, decide to engage with existing institutions and accept becoming part of a progressive collective will in order to radicalize democratic institution and to establish a new hegemony. Well, I now come to my point that I announced before about left-wing populism. I have argued so far that in order to address the crisis of representative democracy, what is called for is the formulation of a progressive project, offering an alternative to the current post-democratic condition which, as I said, is the product of the hegemony of neoliberalism. Now I would like to say something about the kind of political movement that the success of such a project requires, and suggest that it should take the form of a left-wing populism. As I have already suggested, the crisis of representative democracy is not a crisis of representative democracy per se, but a crisis of its current post-democratic incarnation, and of the lack of a debate about possible alternatives. In order to foster such a debate, it is necessary to construct a new political frontier. I mean, one of my main thesis in my work at politics consists in establishing a frontier. And this is why the blurring of the frontier between left and right is problematic for democracy. And because the frontier, we need to reestablish the frontier in order to revivify, to make possible an agonistic confrontation. Without a frontier, there is no agonistic confrontation. However, I think now that this cannot consist only in the development of a party that will be committed to a radical project. So it's not, for instance, and I must say that my view evolved since On the Political, which was published in 2005, and my more recent book, Agonistic, which was published 3 years ago. Because at the time of On the Political, I still must say I had the idea that social democratic parties could be radicalized. They could recover their radical dimension. So I was thinking, but we need to re-establish the left-right divide that existed before. No, I for serious of reason, what if you want, we can discuss that in the later. I think that it's very unlikely, except in a few countries, because social democratic parties have been too complicit with the establishment of neoliberal hegemony, and to believe that they could become, the vehicle for an neoliberal struggle I think is an illusion. So this is why I think that it just cannot be a party that will really recover, its left credential. I think that what's required now is mobilizing a manifold of democratic forces and to establish a synergy between a party form. I think that that's definitively necessary, but with that and progressive social movement. What is at stake is the creation of a collective will. That's an expression from Antonio Gramsci, thanks to the establishment of what we call in hegemony and socialist strategy a chain of equivalence between a multiplicity of heterogeneous democratic demands. It's clear, it seems to me, that the variety of demands, the democratic demands existing in our societies cannot all be expressed through the verticalist party form. Even when we envisage this party in a reform way, it become really, recovering its left soul. Indeed, many of those demands emerge through horizontalist social movement. And I think it's not possible nor desirable to try to force them into the verticalist mode. What is needed, therefore, is a new form of political organization in terms of a party movement, aiming at the articulation of those two modes, the horizontalist and the verticalist. This is how I envisage the nature of a left-wing populist movement. And I think that the case of Syriza in Greece or Podemos in Spain are examples of this type of political organization, which combines the construction of a popular movement with the development of an electoral apparatus. They are characterized by a form of radicalism whose objective is to come to power through election in order to implement a set of counter-hegemonic reform. Of course, as we know, it's not that easy. The example of Syriza and Podemos show it, but it does not mean that this is not the way to follow, but simply that it's a long process. It's a war of position, to use again a Gramscian term. It's clear that the objective of such party is not the demise of liberal democratic institutions, but their profound transformation in order to make them vehicle for the expression of popular demands. Of course, those movements are often criticized for being populist, and that's the way in which the opposition wants to discredit them. But to me, this is to be populist is something positive, not negative, because populism represents an important dimension of democracy. Indeed, democracy understood as the demos kratos, the power of the people, required the existence of a demos, a people. And instead of rejecting the term populist, we should reclaim and re-signify it. The agonistic struggle is a struggle between conflicting hegemonic conceptions of the people. And it is important for the left to grasp the populist dimension of the struggle to construct the people. Seen in terms of a collective will, the people is always a political construction. People are not, we need to distinguish the people and the population. The population is a sociological concept, is there, but the people is always a political construction. And its identity will depend on the chain of equivalence through which it is constructed, and of course, to the type of adversary to which it is opposed. Politics is always construction of us, and let's require a them. Us, this is something that I have repeatedly stressed, that there is no we without a they, and that what secures a specific chain of equivalence, a we, is the they, the adversary, to which it is opposed. This is where lies one of the main differences between right-wing and left-wing populism. It's not so much, in fact, the component of the chain, although that has some importance, but how the adversary is defined, that will determine the identity of the people. It is clear that many of the demands that exist in a society do not have a necessary essentialist, reactionary, or progressive character, and that it is how they are able to be articulated that will determine their identity. And this is why the identity of the we depends on the kind of they to which it is opposed. Here again, if we want to make reference to the Brexit, we could say, well, Brexit, it is a cry by people to have a voice. But of course, this demand can be, articulated in different ways, and in either in a right-wing populist way or in a left-wing populist way. I think there is another aspect of left-wing populism that I want to emphasize. Because for me it's very important, this dimension. Besides allowing an articulation between different modes of political action, party, trade union, and social movement, the advantage of left-wing populism is that it acknowledges the central role played by affect and passion in politics. Here I should specify, in order to clearly differentiate myself to what is recently called the affective or the emotive turn in social science. Why the difference of the follower of the emotive turn? I prefer to speak of passion instead of emotion. I'm often asked, well, why do you speak of passion? Why not emotion? Well, I use passion to refer to the common affects which are at play in the collective form of identification which constitute political identities. Okay, so it's then really specific for construction of political identities, which are always collective identities. It's always us, and there is to use a term from psychoanalysis. There is a very strong libidinal investment in this construction. And this is, the affect. It's mobilization of affects which crystallize us. And I contend that in this process of construction of collective identities, of a collective will, which is, of course, at the core of a left-wing populist movement, common affect play a central role. The attempt by so many liberal democratic political theories to eliminate passion, I mean, in fact, all the people like Habermas, like Roll, what they want is to eliminate passion from the political, to relegate them to the private, so that they can have a pure rational discussion in terms of politics. I think that's for me, and that's an argument which I made in many of my books. This is very, very problematic, and this is why this kind of liberal democratic theory does not really understand what's happening in politics. And I think that is precisely that rejection of the affective dimension and their refusal to accept the crucial role that affects play in politics. That's, of course, one of the reasons for their hostility to populism. But that, I think, is a serious mistake, because, as I have often pointed out, it is because this terrain is being abandoned to right-wing populism that they have been able to make such advances in recent years. Hopefully, thanks to the development of left-wing populist movement, this could change. And I think it's urgent to understand, and this is really a thesis that I want to defend, that the only way to fight against right-wing populism is through left-wing populism. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Chantal Mouffe. I will now give the words to the audience and take questions. Are there some questions? Yes.
Hello, I'm Finn Juncker, a playwright. Thank you very much, Professor Mouffe, for a stimulating lecture. Left-wing populism reminds me of the early 1990s, where some people were talking about good pornography. They didn't make their case because the concept itself was something bad, so it couldn't be turned into something good. And to me, it's the same thing with left-wing populism. Populism can never be something good. It's about empty ideas and demagogy. And just as a comment to your lecture, I don't think real problems can be solved by empty ideas. Thank you.
Can you repeat the last sentence, because I'm not sure I understood.
I don't think real problems in Europe today can be solved with empty ideas. I see populism as empty ideas, in the language of demagogy.
Well, I mean, I really don't have anything to say about that, because you precisely all my lecture, the main aim was to put into question this really simplistic idea of populism, which of course is the way, it's typical, it goes necessarily together with what I've called the center-right and that, because they say there is no alternative, and everybody who pretend that there is an alternative, they're populists, populists of the left, populists of the right, and I mean, this is what I'm arguing. We need to fight against this idea. We need to recover the dimension of populists as part of democracy. So, I mean, obviously, I understand that you might disagree with me, but I don't see how I could answer that, because all my talk was precisely dedicated to put into question you think that this is an empty. Okay, so let's accept that we have a different on this point, as Jean-François Lyotard will say, but I definitively have not convinced you. I mean, but and I understand that this question of re-signifying populism is not going to be an easy task, because it is so much embedded in the common sense of, you know, the post-political, post-democratic common sense. But I think that's the struggle. And moreover, you know, I think it's not something which is only a question of theory. Because at the moment, I think that European countries are faced with a real challenge. I mean, I've just wrote an article that's been published in Spain, in El País, called A Populist Moment. And I think we are really living a populist moment. Because we are, there are definitely the development, and I think is something which is very problematic for democracy, of the rise of those right-wing populism. But if we want to understand how we can stop the rise of those movements and impede the development of those movements in countries where they do not yet exist, we need to understand what is behind that. What is and the fact that those parties really express in a way in which are not at all in agreement, but they are a cry from a set of people which feel excluded in order to have a voice. In fact, this is there was recently in The Guardian an article by Owen Jones, about which, by the way, voted for and campaigned for the Remain, but he said, well, the success of the Brexit, particularly in all the part which were labor, you know, traditional working class, which was always voted labor, and now have them to vote for the Leave, is because, I mean, those people feel that their demands are not heard. There is a cry for being able to have a voice. And if we don't understand that, I mean, I think that those parties are going to have more and more, make more and more inroads. So once you understand that, then you realize that what needs to be done is to develop a kind of strategy to give, to listen to those people, to understand what are their demands, but articulate them in another languages. Languages, in fact, in which, for instance, the enemy or the adversary is not constructed as the immigrants, but to show them that their problem does not come from immigrants. Their problems come from the consequences of neoliberal globalization and financial capitalism. Because obviously, I mean, the question, those people in Britain who have voted for the working class people, who have voted for Leave, is because their condition of deteriorated enormously, but that in recent years. But that, of course, is not the consequence of the European Union at all. It is a consequence of neoliberal policies. You know, but that is why it's important to articulate their demand in that way, to construct a people that, instead of excluding the immigrants, include the immigrant in the us and say, but the them. You know, those are the main forces of neoliberal globalization. Those are the people who are of the institutions which are at the origin of your problem, not the immigrants. So I think that in this discussion about right-wing and left-wing populism, there is a very important dimension which is particularly relevant and urgent today. Because I don't think that traditional social democratic parties, which in fact in many cases now are not even social democratic anymore, they should be called social liberal, are going to be able to stop the rise of the party. Just take the case of France. It's evident that the Socialist Party today is not able to stop the rise of Marine Le Pen. Marine Le Pen, each election, she's getting more and more. And so the way to fight against that is to realize that in great part the reason for this success of Marine Le Pen is that many sectors of the working class feel that the Socialist Party does not at all address their demand anymore. In fact, the Socialist Party is clearly indicated. I mean, not to be fair, it's not only not directly the socialists who say that, but there's a think tank called Terra Nova, which is a think tank very close to the socialists, who declare the working classes are lost for us. There's not even any point trying to recover them. You know, we should concentrate our electorate is the middle classes and the immigrants, because of course the immigrants are less likely to vote for Marine Le Pen. But it's clearly saying Social Democratic Party should forget about working class, you know. So it's not surprising that the case, those working class sectors vote more and more for Marine Le Pen. You know, so I think this is why it's not nothing empty about populism and about right-wing populism. And it's a very big mistake to believe that. You know, you will see at your peril the consequences of defending such a thesis, I'm afraid.
My name is Helge Rønning. I have a question for you. Thank you very much for a very enlightening talk, by the way. I wholeheartedly agree with you in your defense of representative democracy, but I would like you to make some reflections on the role of referenda in relation to representativity, because I do think that at the moment this is going to be one of the most essential areas of discussion, also in relation to your discussion of populism. So could you please do that?
Yes. Well, I'm definitively against the thesis that, you know, to give a voice to the people, the best way to give voice to the people is by referenda. I think that when an agonistic democracy is not is something when there is really the possibility for development and argument about different positions. So it's not some, and also something which I think is inscribed in our approach. I think referenda might make sense for the people who believe that identities, political identities are already there, you know. So people have got their views. And in fact, the political system needs to give directly a form of expression to those views. So, I mean, if that is the case, and that, of course, will be the essentialist conception of identity. You know, you've got your interest, you've got, and then, of course, let's have a way to clearly distinguish if there is a majority in favor of this or not. Of course, even you know, if you follow that, there are a problem about, you know, will it be enough to have a 51%, or should we think of referenda that will have certain condition? For instance, as you might know, the people who in Britain now are saying, let's do it again. It's not simply that there is a pure rerun. they are arguing, and I think they might have a good argument, that such an important decision like a referenda, you can't just do it with a simple majority. You know, you will need, what they are saying is that do the referendum again, but on condition in which they will need to have more than 60% and a certain, I don't remember exactly how much, but participation, which an important amount, because in Britain the referenda now has been won with 37% of the British who voted for. So they say that's not enough. You know, you need to put condition. In the same way, for instance, as you cannot make change to the constitution with a simple majority. In most countries, I don't know what the situation is in Norway, but in most countries you need to have a much bigger majority in order to make a change to the constitution. So I think people might say, okay, so the referenda, but referenda not with simple majority. But I think even in a case like that, it's problematic, because it supposes that the political identities are already given. You know, if you accept that political identities are created, constructed through discourse, through the agonistic struggle, then of course we think that referenda is not the best way, because it does not include all this process. So I think that definitively to see the referenda as the democratic form of decision par excellence, definitively not. On the other side, I will not exclude completely, in some cases, the use of referenda. I think that for specific, but certainly not at the national level, but in case of decision which have could be taken, for instance, in a specific area, for a specific demand, maybe, you know, in referenda could be a way a good way to know exactly what's the state of the public opinion at that level. But it's definitively not a privileged form of democratic decision for me.
Hi, my name is Ellen, and I have a question about Podemos, because they had an election in Spain very recently, and they did okay. They became the third party, but they did worse than expected. And I read some analysis that says that that is because while they used to kind of represent something very different, and also the Indignados, now they are more a more normal party who want to go into government with the Social Democrats, and that the people are not so enthusiastic about that as they were when they were more alternative. I was just wondering if you agree with that, or what do you think of the recent Spanish election?
What is exactly the question? Because I'm not quite sure I've got...
the question is, do you agree that Podemos didn't do so well in the election?
That
Podemos,
yes.
In Spain?
Yes.
They didn't do so well in the election now as they had expected themselves, and they became the third party and not the second. And someone said, I read that that is because they have become a more traditional party who just wants to be in a coalition with Social Democrats, instead of being something completely different, that they have kind of less populist than they used to be, and they lost on that. And
yeah, no, I understand. Well, you know, there is very short after the 26th of June, there is a big discussion at the moment in Spain among Podemos, which I'm following very closely, about, you know, why, I mean, did we lose? It's not that they lose. If you think of it, you know, it's a party that exists for 2 years and which has got 5 million votes and 71 MPs. Is unbelievably good. You know, I'm sure that there are many left-wing parties that will want to follow. So it's not that it's an something. It has been presented as a failure, but here one of the reasons was, of course, that they were opinion polls. I mean, and it's quite, we definitively now are beginning to realize that opinion polls always get it wrong recently. But the opinion polls in all the last week were announcing that Podemos will definitively do the sorpasso to the PSOE. And in fact, at some point, they were saying they were getting close to the Partido Popular. So everybody was convinced of that. So obviously, and even, that's even more strange. Not only opinion pool, but when people just come off, I don't know you say that in English, in Spanish you say encuestas a pie de urna. When people come out of voting, they always ask some their prediction. In Spain, all the prediction made on the basis of interviewing people after they'd voted, at the beginning were saying that there was going to be the sorpasso more than that was up till 12 o'clock. And then after 12 o'clock, it began to go down. It's very strange, very strange. So there was big expectation, okay? So this is why they are definitively disappointed, okay? But I want to insist, in any case, it's a very good result. The question, of course, now is the fight. Why they did, because the main problem, in fact, is that they lost 1 million voters. I mean, they lost 1 million voters, not really Podemos, but this time, and of course that's the main difference with respect to the election in January, in December, to 20th of December, Podemos went jointly with Izquierda Unida, which is the left, the ex-communist, which have been now transformed into broader left party. And they were under the name of Unidos Podemos, so it was already and Unidos Podemos, according to the vote that they bought in December, should have at 1 million vote more than what they got. So they say 1 million vote, among the people who voted for Podemos and for Izquierda Unida disappear. Well, disappear, I mean, disappear for them. But the studies show that, in fact, they did not go those votes to any other party, it was abstention. There are many different interpretation for this fact, the 1 million vote disappearing. One which is quite plausible and defended by some people is that this union with Izquierda Unida was not a good thing. Because in fact, it's many people from Podemos voted for Podemos because they did not want the traditional old left like Izquierda Unida. So they were disappointed to see that Podemos was moving more towards a traditional form of left-wing politics. On the other side, it's also true that many people from Izquierda Unida did not like the union with Podemos because they thought that it was, in fact, going against their left identity. And some analysis show that, in fact, in places where in December Izquierda Unida did very well, there was a lot of abstention this year. So it seems that definitively we can calculate maybe half of the million which was lost come from the people from Izquierda Unida who did not want to vote for Unidos Podemos. So I think it's more to do with the relation between the two than the question with the PSOE, the socialists, which is at stake. Another interpretation is that the problem is not so much with the union with Izquierda Unida, it's more from the campaign, the way the campaign was done. And it's true that the campaign, since they were so confident that they were going to win at the sorpasso for on the PSOE, they were not very aggressive. They were, Pablo Iglesias felt that he had to give an image of somebody who was really, reasonable, that could be head of government. And also, of course, they knew that they were not going to get the absolute majority. So they will need to govern with the PSOE. So they were, in all the debate, Iglesias was saying to Pedro Sanchez, the leader of the PSOE, offering and trying to say, well, we are going to be able to work together. Yeah, it was very welcoming to Sanchez. And some people say, yeah, that is something which, it was not aggressive enough. So they say the problem was with the campaign. At the moment, we still don't know. They are going to, on Saturday, there's going to be a first meeting of all the Podemos group in order to analyze, because at the moment there are many, Carolina Bescansa, which is one of the founders of the movement, is making, an analysis. So I think at the moment we don't really know exactly. There probably a multiplicity of things. You see, on the other side, the alliance with, I think, yeah, probably, and that will go more directly to your question, they might have made a mistake in not taking into account. I think, again, that's a problem of the opinion pool. Last year, there was a moment in which, the opinion polls were, but that was of course 1 year in advance with respect to what the election, but they were announcing really incredible good result for Podemos, even more than the Partido Popular. And that's the moment when Pablo Iglesias went to say, well, el cielo se toma por asalto. I don't know if you say that in English really well. We are going to win. I think that they were really much optimistic, thinking that they could, come to the government. But it's true, the opinion poll were indicating that. And so he said, well, no, we are going to rule. We are going to win. And the mistake was to present La Casta, because them, the adversary for them was they call La Casta, the elites, included both Partido Popular and PSOE. So there was a problem there, because obviously they first presented their adversary as being both PSOE and Partido Popular. But then, of course, they realized that they will have to work with the PSOE. So people were going to say, well, what is this? So is PSOE, is it part of La Casta? Is it part of the adversary? Or is it part of people who... So I think they should really have been more cautious in the way they were defining their adversary, because to define the PSOE, their adversary, and then being forced to work with the PSOE, that of course, created some confusion among the people. So, but on the other side, there is no alternative. They've got to work with the PSOE. The problem is that it's not very likely that it will take place, because in the PSOE there are strong opposition, particularly from what they call the baron of the PSOE, people like Felipe González, who are absolutely, they would rather go in alliance with the Partido Popular than with Podemos. So we'll see, but the moment, I think, prediction seems to be that what's going to happen in Spain is a government of the Partido Popular, not made possible by the abstention of the PSOE, because the Partido Popular, again, they do not have the absolute majority, but if the PSOE abstain in the vote of confidence, they will be able to have a minority government. We don't know. It's quite thrilling what's happening in Spanish politics at the moment.
Please. May I introduce Joan Pontes from Podemos? You want to comment on that?
My name is Juan Pontes from New York, but I was born in Spain, and I'm an artivist. And I will translate Pablo Iglesias saying, "We will take the sky by storm."
We will take the sky by storm. Yes, thank you.
A trooper. I was just in Madrid and Barcelona, and I met a number of artivists. I was here previously with part of the FSS talk, on art and activism, White Cube versus public space. If I can wrap up my experience in Madrid and Barcelona in the past 3 days, on my way to see the Vostell Foundation, which was one of the first artivists in history. Yeah? My friend said, we're very disenchanted. Democracy is dead. La democracia ha muerto, está en manos solamente de los partidos. Democracy, as they see it, is only in the hands of the parties and their platforms. And the majority of the people are disenchanted. How can they vote like this after all the enormous thieves, robbery that has happened in the Partido Popular, etc., etc.? So, to wrap it up, all my friends, same, Barcelona and Madrid, agree that democracy is dead. They don't know how art can filter itself into it. They continue trying. But that the parties, pretty much like in the US, control the democratic process through the media. That lady, speaking of Podemos, the media is the one that says that Podemos didn't succeed. 5 million, I agree with you, 5 million people voted for a party that 2 years ago didn't exist. Yeah? So it's positive, it's fabulous, but it's a mess.
Okay, well, I don't know, I imagine that because we've been speaking about recently the discussion inside Podemos, but of course it's evident that there are also people who were more identified with the indignados or who were very critical from the start with the development of Podemos. You know, so they are, and I know that among the activists particularly, there are many people who, since the beginning, after Vista Alegre, were critical of the fact that the party was constructed in a verticalist, the construction of what they call the electoral machine, and so, and I know, in fact, some of my friends in Spain are people who are critical of Podemos and who are more in favor of the horizontalist approach. But I think that of course, you know, personally, I'm on the side of Podemos because I think that it was absolutely necessary to have this verticalist element, because obviously my whole the strategy which I defend, which is a strategy of engagement with the institution, the way in which you can articulate the horizontalists with the verticalists is for me, the Podemos is the example of that. But so I know people who defend the Exodus approach will not agree with that. They think that it was a mistake but I think often one hears things which are incorrect about Podemos, because, and I know many people there, and they are perfectly aware of the fact that during the last year, they have, in a sense, put all their energy towards the development of the more, you know, institutional form, and have neglected a little bit the circulus. And that now it's time to know that. But they were, you know, there were 5 elections in Spain, and so all the energies of this new party was constantly mobilized through the election. So yeah, there was some imbalance in the thing. But I think that at least the people I know are perfectly aware of that, and they know that it's very important now to really, reinforce and create new form of articulation with the circulars. So it's not. I don't think that. First, I don't think that democracy is dead in Spain. I mean, if you compare, I think one of the exciting things to go to Spain is to see how people are discussing and you don't see that in any other European countries. It's really heartwarming to see the mobilization and the young people and the discussion. So I think it's, to say that democracy is dead is really, I disagree profoundly with that. But it is now a challenge for Podemos, and of course the difficulty, and that is something, for instance, that Inigo Errejón recently in the discussion that they had at the Universidad Complutense a little bit to analyze, say the challenge, and if, I mean, they manage to find that way, it's really going to be very important for all the people who are in the line of, this engagement. How can you, once you are in the institution, fight against, the institution? Because when we are outside, it's very, very easy. But once you enter the institution, how are you going to be both in and out? And they said, this is what we have, they've been 6 months in government, and they said, well, that we realized the difficulty. I mean, some people, of course, say, no, it's impossible. Once you enter the institution, you are automatically, captured by them. I hope, I personally believe, but of course, I might, be proven wrong after several experiences, that it should be possible. I mean, the hegemonic struggle is that, it is to be inside the institution and to transform them from the inside. This is what Podemos is going to have to learn, because I don't think that Podemos is going to be transformed into a traditional party. I mean, not the people I know there definitively, that's not what they want. Maybe they will not succeed. That's possible, But they are going, and they are really going to try to see how one can transform the institution. And they are not just going to accept, okay, so we are one more party and no, that's for sure. But it is a challenge. To have this, and of course another thing is that the synergy between social movement and party form is also very complicated. It's not something that, okay, well, let's work together. They are tension. They are tension. But I think honestly, I don't see any other alternative. I don't see any other alternative because pure horizontalist struggle is not going to really transform, profoundly relation of power. You need to engage the state. And of course, the pure verticalist party form is not either, So it's only this articulation, which is very difficult, very complicated. But let's hope that there will be successful, because I think that the future of democracy really lies in there.
Thank you. There are 2 more persons which.
And in fact, I don't know, because
we will end.
I didn't want to enter. I've got a last point. I don't know if people are interested in that, which I decided not to give because I wanted to be sure that there was time for the discussion. But if there were, and I also thought that maybe here in Norway you are not so interested in that aspect because you are not part of the EU. But it's a point that I would like to make, if you are interested, and if there is time, about European left-wing populism, because I think that this left-wing populism that I'm arguing for, I think can only exist if it's got a European dimension. So I don't know. I mean, are people interested in me? Do we have time? And are you interested in hearing to that, knowing that you are not in it, in the EU or not? What do you think? Yes. Should I? Yes? Okay. All right. So this is, as I said, last point to conclude, but I decided to leave it because I wanted to have time for the discussion. So examining the causes of the difficulties encountered in our post-democratic representative democracies, have argued that the future of democracy depends on the development of a left-wing populism that could revive interest in politics by mobilizing passion and fomenting an agonistic debate about the availability of an alternative to the current neoliberal order. But I would like to insist that the mobilization that I advocate should take place at the European level, because it is impossible to envisage an alternative to neoliberalism at the national level. I'm convinced of that. As the European coup against the Syriza government in Greece has shown, the neoliberal forces dominant in the EU will never allow the success of a government that challenges the dogma that there is no alternative to their austerity policies. So what is urgently needed is a European left-wing populist movement able to bring about an agonistic confrontation about the future of the EU. I'm convinced that in the present conjuncture, and I think that that was written before the Brexit, and I'm convinced even more after the Brexit, that such a confrontation is absolutely vital. Many people on the left are beginning to doubt about the possibility of constructing within the framework of the EU an alternative to the neoliberal model of globalization. The EU is increasingly perceived as being an intrinsically neoliberal project that cannot be reformed. It seems vain to try transforming its institution, and the only solution that remains is to exit. Such a pessimistic view is no doubt the result of the fact that all attempts to challenge the prevalent neoliberal rules are constantly presented as expression of an anti-European attack against the very existence of the Union. I mean, that I think is crucial. If you criticize the European Union, it exists, you are anti-European. There is no possibility of challenging really existing neoliberal Europe. And of course, without the possibility of making legitimate criticism of the current neoliberal policies, it's not surprising that a growing number of people are turning to Euroscepticism. They believe that it is the European project itself that is the cause of our current predicament, and they feel that more European integration can only mean a reinforcement of neoliberal hegemony. And it's clear that such a position endangers the survival of the European project, and the only way to stop its expansion is by creating the condition for a democratic contestation within the European Union. In my view, what lies at the bottom of the disaffection with the EU is the absence of a project that could foster a strong identification among the citizens of Europe and provide an objective to mobilize their political passion in a democratic direction. The EU is currently composed of consumers, not of citizens. It has been mainly constructed around a common market, and it never really created a genuine common will. No wonder that in times of economic crisis and austerity policies, some people begin to question its utility, forgetting what has been its important achievement in bringing peace to the continent. What is urgently needed is to foster popular allegiance to the EU. I mean, the Brexit shows us more than ever this. Thanks to the elaboration of a socio-political project offering an alternative to the neoliberal model that has prevailed in recent decades. This model is now in crisis, but a different one is not yet available. We could say, following Gramsci again, that we are witnessing what he called an organic crisis, in which the old model cannot continue, but the new one is not yet born. Alas, the center-left cannot take advantage of this situation because it has accepted for too long the idea that there was no alternative to neoliberal globalization. Moreover, in many countries, center-left government has played an important role in the process of deregulation and privatization that they have contributed, and they have contributed to neoliberal hegemony. To be sure, European institutions have their part in the responsibility of the current crisis, but I think it's a mistake to present this crisis as a crisis of the European project. It is a crisis of the neoliberal incarnation of the European project. And this is why current attempts to solve it by more neoliberal policies cannot succeed. The only way to fight against the rise of anti-European feeling and to stop the growth of right-wing populist parties that excite those feelings is by uniting European citizens around a new vision that could give them hope of a different democratic future. And by the way, I do hope that if we were able to do that, it will also appeal to the Norwegians, so that suddenly you would say, oh my God, this Europe is really exciting. We want to join it. And that, I think, requires establishing at the European level a synergy between left parties and social movements around such a vision, which will make possible the emergence of a collective will aiming at a radical transformation of the current hegemonic order. And I'm convinced that without the development of a left-wing populist movement, able to mobilize people hope and passion toward a more just and egalitarian society, there is a serious risk that right-wing populist parties will succeed in occupying this terrain. They are already succeeding. This is why, I insist in my first answer, I said this is a crucial moment. I mean, we need to find ways to stop this. Because if that was going to happen, the situation will be much worse than our current post-democratic situation. Thank you. So there's time for a few more questions, no?
Okay.
Thank you very much, Madam, for sharing our important thoughts and work with us and coming here to Oslo. My question is related to the profound transformation of the institutions that you mentioned, and it's been between the lines in also your answers to the other questions. Living here in Norway, which you know it's a monarchy, constitutional monarchy, which for some purists might be a contradiction in terms with democracy, but this is also goes along for.
Can you? It's difficult to. Can you put the microphone nearest to your voice?
This is functioning.
Yeah, it's better. No.
Better.
This is better? Yes. So my question is about the transformation, the profound transformation of institutions. Institutions is also much about symbols and rituals, and well, it's difficult to demise a monarchy in these Western democracies that has chosen that form of constitution as well. But transformation, it used to be related from the West. The left side of politics traditionally has claimed for revolutions in order to make transformations, whereas on the right side it's been more reformist movements. When these left and right meets at the center and there is no more room for revolution and also violent threshold in human history has going down, first to Foucault, for instance, and how could we transform these institutions, European institutions and democratic institutions? What are the tools when, well, this seems to be no more conflict in that?
Yeah, well, in answer about Podemos, presently I already, in a sense, say there are no recipe. That's the question. And of course, in each country is going to be different. I mean, the way you can do that in Spain. But what, in answer to, I think your question was in fact indicating something more general, because clearly the line which, of reflection which I develop here is one, I will call that radical reformism. Because it's definitely not, and that was already the case in hegemony socialist strategy. In fact, one of the main theses of the book, the political thesis, because there are many theoretical theses, was that the socialist project needed to be redefined in terms of the radicalization of liberal democratic institutions. So we were clearly opposing there, it was a book published 30 years ago, and so the old political parliament was very different, and there was still quite an important Marxist left were saying well, the thing that we need to a revolution because there won't be an end of capitalist system without a revolution, and so we were opposing this kind of line. And that, by the way, it's important, 85, so it was even before the fall of the Soviet Union, and so it was really a moment in which the kind of Marxist imaginary of revolution was still very, the Jacobin idea was still very important. So we were criticizing that. We were saying, and very much in a sense in the line of what was at that time Euro-communism and the interpretation of Gramsci, thinking of, well, revolution or socialism in the socialism in the West cannot be envisaged in the way in which it was envisaged in the East, so because if you've got democratic system, the question is not to destroy those systems, is to radicalize them. And in fact, what we were arguing is that if you take that the ethico-political principle of liberal pluralist democracy are liberty and equality for all, you can't find more radical principle. The problem with our existing liberal democratic societies is that they do not put in practice their ideals. So it's not the idea themselves, is that they claim that, but they don't put it into practice. So what we need to do is to force those societies to really be consistent with their ideal. And this is what I understand by radicalization of liberal democratic principle. So it is, and this is the strategy which is, so it's some kind of immanent critique, from the inside. You don't need to destroy this society and create something completely new. There is one, of course, it means that this only exists when you have already democratic institution. For instance, I would never dream of saying in a dictatorial country the aim is to radicalize democracy, because if you don't have a democratic institution, you can't even radicalize them. So there you might need a revolution, in order to end dictatorship. But in our advanced liberal democratic societies, our claim was that the strategy should be one called radical reformism. And this is what I call the strategy of engagement with the institution in order to transform them. As to the question and the recipe, I can't give, think that it will be valid everywhere. I mean, it's really a question of seeing the conjuncture. But what we can see, and that of course it also is based on a certain understanding of the state. The state, contrary to some kind of traditional Marxism, is not just an element of oppression. It's not something. It is first. It's composed of many different apparatuses. There are some of them, which have different function. And it is possible with those we call the nodal points of an hegemonic system. So it is possible, for instance, to transform one, intervene in one. And in fact, it's very important to realize that, and contrary to the traditional view of revolution, that, okay, you come to power and then, everything follows. No. For instance, we've seen in countries, well, I'm thinking, for instance, in countries like in Latin America, where, particularly, for instance, the case of Argentina, which I know better, where, when there've been the development of a national popular movement under the Kirchner, they've very quickly realized that they were there. For instance, they were in government, yeah, but the whole power, the press was completely dominated by, basically one big corporation, Clarín. The judiciary, there are many, and during the whole time in which the 12 years of the Kirchner power, they were constantly attacked by the judiciary was on the side of the opposition, the press was on the side of the opposition, at the point that, for instance, Christina Kirchner, and that's it's a reform that has been, it failed, she did not manage to implement it, but it was celebrated by the UNESCO and many institutions as being the most democratic, the best. The law, it was called in Spanish, ley de medios, law for the organization of the media. Because the aim was that in Argentina, you've got basically one big Clarín who control not only the paper, but also, for instance, internet, who controls also many TV channels, and they control even the papel prensa, which is where the papel is produced. So they are the one who decide, we give papel. So the law that ley de medio that Christina Kirchner proposed, and in fact, that's interesting to see, because it's a law that came, it's not the government who decided that, it's the social movement who propose this. They say, well, we need to have a possibility, for our voice to be heard. We need to have channels in TV and radio that for us, to give us voice. And then the government took this project and elaborated a law, which was passed in not only the Congress, but the Senate. And of course, the question is that with the power of the Clarín, they always manage to stop the implementation of the law by in Spanish, the medida cautelar, because they were always but this is anti-constitutional. So for 6 years after the law was voted at the both, the Congress and Senate, it went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided in favor of the law. They said, no, this law is constitutional. So at that point, they go, okay, so we are going to be able to put it in practice. They created an institution called the AXFA, and still, Clarín managed to impede the putting into practice of this law. And of course, because they wanted to know, let's wait till the end of the mandate of Christina, there will be another government, and of course, they were, all the press, was criticizing the Kirchner government and promoting the opposition. And finally, in December, Macri won the election, and the first thing he did was to end this thing of the ley de medio. So it shows you the power of the media, even when people are in government, and something very similar is happening with the judiciary. So it shows you that there are many. If you want to really transform the system from that, of course. Because, okay, it's impossible, It's impossible because, look, they've got so much power. Well, it's a long process, and this is what Gramsci called a war of position. And I think that this strategy of radical reformism is very much conceived in terms of a war of position. But you need to have target. You need to see where the main basis of power, what we call the nodal points of neoliberal hegemony are established, and fight at all those levels. But that, of course, is going to be very different according to which country and with the tradition and the forces of the left. But this is, I think, the only way, the war of position. This is, by the way, what Podemos is going to fight for. They in fact have already declared, okay, no, the phase of Saltar and Cielo is finished. We are now entering the phase of war of position. But war of position, I think, need to be understood. Is not some people say, okay, no, we are part of the system. We are becoming normalized. No, war of position is in fact, to fight, to transform the relation of power inside, but still with an idea that what is at stake is a form of radical reformism.